Marcus Chun adjusted his worn maintenance jumpsuit as he walked through the pristine corridors of Nexus Station. The massive space station served as the primary trading hub for this sector of the galaxy, where dozens of alien species conducted business under the watchful eye of the Galactic Trade Consortium. To most inhabitants, Marcus was just another human laborer, barely worth acknowledging as they went about their important affairs. The station buzzed with activity as various species moved through its wide hallways. Tall, elegant Altarians with their crystalline skin caught the light as they glided past, their musical voices discussing complex trade agreements. Massive Croton merchants, resembling bipedal rhinoceroses, stomped through the corridors carrying heavy cargo containers that would crush most beings. The snake-like Sithrak delegation slithered by in formation, their scales shifting colors to communicate in ways most species couldn't understand. Marcus kept his head down and his tool belt secure as he made his way to the lower maintenance levels. 3 years he had worked on this station, fixing atmosphere processors, repairing gravity generators, and maintaining the 1,000 systems that kept Nexus Station operational. 3 years of being treated like furniture by the alien inhabitants who saw humans as nothing more than cheap labor. "Watch where you're going, monkey," snarled a Vroken security officer as Marcus stepped aside to let a trade delegation pass. The reptilian alien's forked tongue flicked out dismissively. Vrokens considered themselves the apex predators of known space, with their enhanced strength, natural armor plating, and centuries of military dominance. To them, soft-skinned humans were barely evolved primates. Marcus said nothing, simply nodded and continued on his way. He had learned long ago that responding to such insults only brought more attention, and attention was the last thing he wanted. The other maintenance workers, mostly other humans with a few Gelthans mixed in, knew him as quiet, competent, and unremarkable. He finished his assignments efficiently, kept to himself during breaks, and never caused trouble. The truth was far more complicated. As Marcus entered the maintenance section, he passed through multiple security checkpoints without triggering any alarms. His biometric signature registered as Marcus Chun, human, maintenance worker level 3, security clearance yellow. The scanners detected his standard toolkit, his work tablet, and nothing else of interest. What they couldn't detect were the modifications he had made to seemingly ordinary equipment over the past 3 years. The gravity wrench in his tool belt looked identical to every other gravity wrench used by maintenance staff, but Marcus had carefully restructured its internal components. The quantum flux capacitor had been rewired to generate a localized electromagnetic pulse when activated in a specific sequence. His multi-tool contained additional functions hidden within its standard programming. Even his work tablet had been subtly modified to access station systems far beyond his official clearance level. These modifications hadn't been random tinkering. Every change served a specific purpose, part of a larger plan that had been years in the making. Marcus hadn't come to Nexus Station looking for work. He had come hunting. The lower maintenance levels were quieter, with only the steady hum of machinery and the occasional footsteps of other workers. Marcus made his way to Section C7, where the primary atmosphere processors maintained the station's breathing environment. The area was restricted to essential personnel only, which made it perfect for privacy. He activated his work tablet and began what appeared to be a routine diagnostic of the atmospheric systems. To any observer, he was simply checking oxygen levels, carbon dioxide scrubbers, and filtration efficiency. In reality, he was accessing the station's central computer network through a backdoor he had carefully constructed over months of legitimate maintenance visits. Information flowed across his screen in streams of data that would have overwhelmed most technicians. Ship manifests, passenger lists, security protocols, trade agreements, and diplomatic schedules all passed through his review. Marcus absorbed it all with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent decades analyzing complex intelligence patterns. His target was somewhere on this station. 3 years ago, Marcus had received intelligence that Thane Corvex, one of the galaxy's most wanted war criminals, was using Nexus Station as a base of operations. Corvex had been responsible for the massacre on Kepler, 442b, where an entire human colony had been wiped out under the guise of a piracy suppression operation. 2 million civilians had died, including Marcus's sister and her family. The Galactic Justice Tribunal had issued a warrant for Corvex's arrest, but the Vroken warlord had powerful connections and unlimited resources. He moved through protected space under false identities, always staying one step ahead of official law enforcement. Traditional justice had failed. That's where Marcus came in. Few beings in the galaxy knew that humanity had produced some of the most effective hunters and trackers in known space. While other species had evolved specialized physical capabilities, humans had developed something far more dangerous: adaptability, patience, and an almost supernatural ability to think like their prey. Marcus had spent 15 years with human military intelligence before the Kepler incident. He specialized in deep cover operations, often spending months or years establishing an identity before completing his mission. His record was flawless, with 17 successful extractions of high-value targets from heavily defended positions. But this wasn't an official mission. This was personal. A soft chime from his tablet drew his attention. The station's passenger manifest had updated with new arrivals from the luxury liner Astral Princess. Marcus scanned through the names, cross-referencing them against his extensive database of known aliases and associates. Most were routine: trade representatives, diplomats, wealthy tourists seeking exotic experiences at the galaxy's edge. Then he saw it. Karath Velks, listed as a Vroken mineral rights negotiator traveling with a small security detail. The biometric data was too good to be fake, which meant it was exactly good enough to be the kind of high-quality forgery that Corvex could afford. Marcus allowed himself a thin smile. After 3 years of patience, his prey had finally come within reach. He completed his atmospheric diagnostics with practiced efficiency while his mind raced through tactical considerations. Corvex would be traveling under heavy security, probably staying in one of the station's luxury quarters. Direct confrontation was impossible. Even with his modifications, Marcus was one human against what would likely be a team of trained Vroken warriors. But Marcus had advantages they couldn't anticipate. 3 years of careful preparation had given him intimate knowledge of every system on the station. He knew which corridors had surveillance gaps, which maintenance shafts provided access to restricted areas, and which emergency protocols could be exploited to create chaos. More importantly, he understood how predators thought. Corvex had survived this long by being cautious, paranoid, and utterly ruthless. He would have multiple escape routes planned, layers of security surrounding him, and contingencies for every conceivable threat. But all of that planning would be focused on traditional dangers: rival criminals, law enforcement raids, political assassins with obvious weapons, and clear intentions. No one would suspect the quiet human maintenance worker who had been invisible on the station for 3 years. Marcus finished his work and made his way back through the station's corridors. As he walked, he observed everything with fresh eyes. The Vroken security teams that patrolled key areas, their movement patterns, and shift rotations. The placement of surveillance devices and their blind spots. The emergency systems that could be triggered to create diversions or lock down specific sections. He passed a group of Altarian diplomats discussing trade negotiations in their musical language. Their conversation was animated, focused on some complex disagreement about mining rights in the Outer Rim territories. Marcus listened casually, his linguistic implants automatically translating their words. The topic was interesting, but not immediately relevant to his mission. However, as he continued walking, Marcus began to see connections. Mining rights meant resource disputes. Resource disputes often involved enforcement actions. And enforcement actions in this sector were frequently carried out by Vroken mercenary groups. A plan began to form in his mind. Marcus made his way to the station's central database core, located deep in the heavily shielded section of the station. His maintenance clearance gave him legitimate access to the area, where he ostensibly needed to check the cooling system for the massive computer banks that ran Nexus Station's operations. The reality was more complex. Over the past 3 years, Marcus had gradually mapped the entire database structure, identifying security vulnerabilities and creating hidden access points. What appeared to be routine cooling system maintenance was actually a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation. He connected his modified tablet to the cooling system's monitoring network, which provided him with indirect access to the central databases. Layer by layer, he penetrated the security protocols, moving through the system like a ghost. His infiltration methods were subtle and patient, designed to leave no trace of unauthorized access. The information he sought was buried deep in encrypted trade records, but Marcus had learned to read between the lines. Shipping manifests revealed unusual cargo movements. Financial records showed payments that didn't match official trade agreements. Communication logs contained coded references that meant nothing to automated systems, but spoke volumes to someone who understood the criminal underworld. Korvex wasn't just hiding on the station. He was conducting business. The Vroken warlord was meeting with representatives from several major criminal organizations, negotiating the sale of military-grade weapons to insurgent groups in 3 different star systems. The weapons had been stolen from a Human Defense Force depot 6 months ago, resulting in the deaths of 37 soldiers who had tried to stop the raid. Marcus felt cold fury building in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. Emotional reactions led to mistakes, and mistakes got people killed. He had learned that lesson the hard way during his early years in intelligence work. Instead, he focused on gathering actionable intelligence. Meeting schedules, security arrangements, payment methods, and delivery timelines all went into his mental database. The more he learned about Korvex's operation, the better he could predict the warlord's behavior and identify weaknesses to exploit. The most interesting discovery was that Korvex had requested a private meeting with Station Administrator Kethvar, one of the most powerful Altarians in this sector. The meeting was scheduled for tomorrow evening in the Administrator's private chambers, with minimal security presence to avoid drawing attention. Marcus completed his cooling system diagnostics and made his way back to the maintenance quarters. To any observer, he was simply finishing another routine shift, heading home to rest before tomorrow's assignments. But his mind was already working through the tactical challenges ahead. Korvex had made a critical error by coming to Nexus Station personally. The warlord probably believed his false identity, and heavy security made him untouchable. He had no way of knowing that his hunter had been patiently waiting for exactly this opportunity. As Marcus entered his small quarters in the worker housing section, he allowed himself a moment to think about his sister Sarah. She had been a teacher on Kepler 442b, working with human children who had been born in space and had never seen Earth. Her last message to Marcus had been excited babbling about her students' progress in learning ancient Earth literature. The Vroken attack had come without warning. Korvex's forces had claimed they were responding to pirate activity, but the evidence showed a systematic execution of civilians. Men, women, children, elderly colonists who had never hurt anyone in their lives. All murdered to send a message about human expansion into what Vrokens considered their territory. Marcus had spent months trying to work within official channels, providing intelligence to the Galactic Justice Tribunal and supporting their investigation. But Korvex had too many powerful friends, too many officials in his pocket, too many layers of legal protection. Sometimes, justice required a more direct approach. Marcus opened a concealed panel in his quarters and retrieved a small metal case. Inside, carefully secured in shock-resistant foam, was a single object that would have caused panic if discovered by station security. It appeared to be an ordinary maintenance tool, but Marcus had spent years perfecting its design. The device was a marvel of human engineering, combining nanotechnology, quantum mechanics, and good old-fashioned mechanical precision. It could penetrate virtually any armor, bypass most energy shields, and deliver its payload with surgical accuracy. More importantly, It was completely undetectable by standard security scans. Marcus held the device for a moment, thinking about the path that had brought him to this point. 3 years of careful planning, months of intelligence gathering, and decades of training had all led to this moment. Tomorrow, Thane Corvex would discover that humans were far more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy suspected. The station continued its steady rotation around the nearby star, carrying thousands of beings who had no idea that tomorrow would change everything. In the luxury quarters, Corvex was probably reviewing his business plans, confident in his security and supremacy. In the diplomatic sections, officials were negotiating deals that would affect millions of lives across the galaxy. And in a small maintenance workers' quarters, a human predator was preparing for the hunt of his lifetime. Marcus carefully returned the device to its hiding place and began preparing for sleep. Tomorrow would require every advantage he could gain, and that meant being well-rested, mentally sharp, and emotionally controlled. He had waited 3 years for this opportunity. He could wait one more night. As he settled into his narrow bed, Marcus thought about what the galaxy would learn in the next few days. For too long, humans have been dismissed as weak, primitive, barely worth considering as a threat. Species like the Vrokans saw them as easy prey, suitable only for manual labor and subjugation. That perception was about to change dramatically. Marcus closed his eyes and began the mental exercises he had learned during his military training. Controlled breathing, muscle relaxation, and visualization of tomorrow's mission parameters. Within minutes, he was asleep, his unconscious mind continuing to process tactical data and refine his plans. In his dreams, he saw Sarah's face, smiling as she talked about her students and their bright futures. Those futures had been stolen by Corvex's brutality, but tomorrow would begin the process of balance. Not justice in any legal sense, but something far more primal and immediate. The hunt was about to begin. Marcus woke before his alarm, a habit ingrained from years of military service. The artificial morning cycle on Nexus Station was beginning, with lighting systems gradually brightening to simulate a planetary sunrise. Around him, other maintenance workers stirred in their cramped quarters, preparing for another day of keeping the massive station operational. He moved through his morning routine with deliberate calm, knowing that today everything would change. Shower, basic meal, equipment check, work assignment review. To anyone watching, he was just another human worker starting another ordinary day. The careful observer might have noticed that his movements were more precise than usual, his awareness more acute, but such details would likely be dismissed as individual variation. Marcus made his way to the maintenance briefing room, where Supervisor Gelthin was distributing the day's assignments. The slug-like alien's multiple eye stalks swiveled as he addressed the assembled workers in his wet, bubbling voice. Atmosphere processors in Section G need full diagnostic, the supervisor announced. Gravity generators in the diplomatic quarter require calibration. And someone needs to check the environmental systems in the luxury housing complex. Marcus stepped forward. I'll take the luxury complex, supervisor. My certifications are current for those systems. Gelthin's eye stalks focused on him briefly. Marcus had volunteered for difficult assignments often enough that such initiative wasn't unusual. The supervisor made a note on his tablet and continued distributing assignments. Perfect. The luxury housing complex was exactly where Marcus needed to be. As the briefing concluded and workers dispersed to their assignments, Marcus collected his equipment with extra care. His modified tools looked identical to regulation equipment, but each had been carefully altered over months of patient work. The plasma cutter could generate focused electromagnetic pulses. The atmospheric scanner contained hidden surveillance devices. His work tablet had been transformed into a sophisticated hacking tool. Most importantly, concealed within a routine calibration device, was the weapon he had spent 3 years perfecting. Marcus made his way through the station's corridors, observing the morning activity with professional interest. Vroken security teams were conducting their regular patrols, their reptilian faces alert for any signs of trouble. Diplomatic staff hurried between meetings, carrying sealed containers that probably held sensitive trade agreements or negotiation proposals. The luxury housing complex occupied an entire deck of the station's upper levels, with enhanced shielding, private security, and environmental controls that could be customized for any species requirements. Access was strictly controlled, but maintenance workers with the proper clearance could enter when accompanied by security escorts. Marcus approached the checkpoint with confidence. His credentials were genuine, his assignment was legitimate, and his appearance was unremarkable. The security scanner verified his identity and checked his equipment manifest against station regulations. "Purpose of visit?" asked the Vroken guard, her translator rendering her hissing speech in standard galactic trade language. "Environmental system maintenance in suites 147 through 152, Marcus replied, showing his work order. "Routine calibration and efficiency checks." The guard reviewed his documents with the thoroughness expected of professional security. Finding everything in order, she activated a personal escort beacon and assigned him a monitoring device. Standard protocol for maintenance work in restricted areas. Marcus clipped the monitor to his belt without complaint. The device would track his movements and record his activities, but he had anticipated this complication. Hidden within his atmospheric scanner was a small quantum interference generator that would gradually degrade the monitor's signal accuracy over the next few hours. "Guard Unit 7 will accompany you," the security officer announced. "Do not deviate from your assigned route. Complete your work efficiently and report when finished." Marcus nodded and waited for his escort to arrive. Guard Unit 7 turned out to be a young Vroken male, probably new to security work based on his nervous energy and overly alert posture. Inexperienced guards could be easier to manipulate, but they were also more likely to notice unusual behavior. As they made their way through the luxury complex, Marcus observed everything with the trained eye of someone who had spent years infiltrating secure facilities. Camera placement, patrol routes, emergency exits, communication protocols. The layout was impressive, clearly designed by security professionals who understood the importance of controlling access and maintaining surveillance. Suite 147 was registered to a wealthy Altarian merchant who was currently off-station on business. Marcus's environmental scans were genuine, methodically checking atmosphere composition, temperature regulation, and filtration efficiency. The work gave him legitimate reasons to access wall panels, examine ventilation systems, and move through restricted areas. More importantly, it provided cover for installing sophisticated surveillance devices in strategic locations. The micro-cameras he planted were smaller than dust motes, virtually undetectable by standard security sweeps. Each device was powered by ambient electromagnetic fields and transmitted data through quantum entanglement channels that couldn't be intercepted or traced. Within minutes, Marcus had established a comprehensive surveillance network throughout the luxury complex. "How much longer?" asked his Vroken escort, clearly bored by the routine maintenance work. "About 30 minutes per suite," Marcus replied without looking up from his scanner. "Want to make sure everything is properly calibrated. Wealthy guests expect perfect environmental conditions." The guard settled into a more relaxed stance, apparently resigned to a morning of watching a human work with incomprehensible equipment. Marcus continued his methodical progress through the environmental systems, gathering intelligence with each scan. Suite 149 was registered to Koroth Velks, the false identity that Corvex was using. Marcus's instruments detected elevated security measures, reinforced walls, advanced jamming systems, and what appeared to be military-grade threat detection equipment. The environmental controls showed customization for Vroken physiology, with higher temperature settings and modified atmosphere composition. Most interesting was the presence of additional life signs. According to his hidden sensors, at least 6 beings were currently in the suite, despite registry information indicating a single occupant. Corvex was meeting with associates, probably finalizing the weapons deals that Marcus had uncovered in his database research. Marcus completed his environmental scan of Suite 149 with professional thoroughness, taking longer than necessary to plant additional surveillance devices. His quantum scanners penetrated the suite's jamming systems, giving him real-time intelligence about the meeting in progress. The conversation was in Vroken military dialect, which Marcus understood fluently thanks to his intelligence training. Corvex was indeed finalizing weapons sales, discussing delivery schedules, and payment methods with representatives from 3 different criminal organizations. The scale of the operation was enormous, enough military hardware to equip several insurgent armies. More disturbing was Corvex's discussion of future plans. The warlord was negotiating for the purchase of enhanced biological weapons, designed specifically to target human genetic markers. The implication was clear. Kepler 442b had been a test run. Corvex was planning genocide on a galactic scale. Marcus kept his expression neutral as cold fury built in his chest. The beings in that room were casually discussing the murder of millions, treating mass extermination as a simple business transaction. They saw humans as vermin to be eliminated, obstacles to Vroken expansion that could be removed with the right application of biotechnology. They had no idea that their primary obstacle was standing 3 meters away, disguised as a maintenance worker. Next suite, Marcus announced to his escort, packing his equipment with deliberate care. He needed to maintain his cover while processing the intelligence he had gathered. Corvex was even more dangerous than anyone had suspected, but he was also vulnerable. The meeting in Suite 149 was scheduled to conclude in 2 hours, after which Corvex would remain in the luxury complex until his evening appointment with Station Administrator Kethvar. That gave Marcus a narrow window of opportunity to position himself for the final phase of his operation. Suite 150 belonged to a Croton trade representative who was currently attending negotiations in the diplomatic sector. Marcus's environmental scans revealed standard Croton atmospheric requirements: high pressure, elevated carbon dioxide levels, and trace amounts of methane that most species found unpleasant. Perfect cover for the next phase of his mission. As Marcus worked through his routine maintenance procedures, he was simultaneously modifying the suite's environmental systems. The changes were subtle but significant, creating a network of hidden access points and emergency overrides that would be crucial for his escape plan. His escort was growing increasingly bored, occasionally checking personal messages on handheld device. The Vroken clearly considered maintenance work beneath his attention, which was exactly what Marcus had hoped for. Complacent guards made critical mistakes. "I need to check the central environmental processor," Marcus announced. "It's located in the maintenance shaft between suites. Should take about 15 minutes. The guard looked up from his device with mild annoyance. "Is that necessary?" Marcus showed him the readings on his scanner, pointing to data that suggested potential efficiency problems in the atmospheric processing system. If this degrades further, it could affect all the luxury suites. Wealthy guests don't tolerate environmental fluctuations. The guard reluctantly agreed, accompanying Marcus to the access panel that led to the central processing unit. The maintenance shaft was barely large enough for a human, far too small for a Vroken in full armor. Standard protocol would require the guard to remain at the entrance while Marcus worked inside. "I'll monitor your progress through the communication system," the guard announced, clearly relieved to avoid crawling through the cramped maintenance shaft. Marcus nodded and entered the shaft, carrying his equipment pack and maintaining radio contact with his escort. Once inside, however, he activated a small signal jammer that would gradually degrade the communication link while making it appear to be a natural equipment malfunction. The maintenance shaft was a maze of pipes, cables, and processing units that served the entire luxury complex. Marcus moved through the space with practiced efficiency, his modified equipment allowing him to access systems far beyond his official clearance level. His primary target was the security network that protected Corvex's suite. The luxury complex's defenses were impressive, but not impregnable, especially for someone with Marcus's technical expertise and 3 years of preparation. Layer by layer, he penetrated the security protocols, creating hidden backdoors and establishing override codes. The most sophisticated challenge was Corvex's personal security system, which included quantum encryption, biometric locks, and AI-controlled threat assessment protocols. Marcus had anticipated this level of protection and spent months developing countermeasures. His breakthrough came from an unexpected source: the environmental systems themselves. Every luxury suite required constant atmospheric monitoring to maintain optimal conditions for its occupants. This monitoring system was considered low priority from a security perspective, protected by standard encryption rather than military-grade protocols. But the environmental monitors were connected to all of the suite's major systems, including security networks. Marcus used this connection as a pathway into Corvex's defenses, following environmental data streams through quantum channels until he reached the security control center. Once inside, he began the delicate process of modifying threat assessment parameters and creating exceptions that would allow his presence to go undetected. The work required absolute precision. One error would trigger security alerts and expose his mission. Too much change too quickly would activate automatic lockdown procedures. Marcus had to move like a surgeon, making microscopic adjustments that would accumulate into strategic advantages. As he worked, his hidden surveillance devices continued monitoring the meeting in Suite 149. Corvex was concluding his weapons negotiations, apparently satisfied with the terms he had arranged. The criminal representatives were preparing to leave, which meant Marcus was running out of time to complete his infiltration. "Marcus, report status," came his escort's voice through the communication system, slightly distorted by the interference Marcus had introduced. "Processing unit calibration in progress," Marcus replied, encountering some unexpected complexity in the quantum flux manifolds. "May need additional time to complete proper adjustments." The guard's response was garbled by increasing static, suggesting that the communication degradation was proceeding as planned. Within another few minutes, the link would fail entirely, giving Marcus the freedom to move without constant monitoring. Marcus completed his security infiltration and began the next phase of his mission. Using his administrative access to the environmental systems, he started modifying the atmospheric composition in the maintenance shafts surrounding Suite 149. The changes were subtle but significant, creating pockets of gas that would be invisible to most detection systems, but highly flammable under the right conditions. His plan was beginning to take shape. Corvex would be isolated in his suite after the weapons meeting concluded. The security systems would be compromised, allowing Marcus access while masking his presence from automated sensors. The environmental modifications would provide both distraction and escape routes when the time came for action. Most importantly, Corvex would never see him coming. Marcus finished his work in the maintenance shaft and began making his way back to his escort. The communication system was now completely non-functional, filled with static and electronic noise that suggested equipment failure rather than deliberate interference. When he emerged from the access panel, his broken escort was talking urgently into his radio, trying to establish contact with supervisors about the communication malfunction. "Equipment failure in the environmental monitoring system," Marcus announced, showing the guard his scanner readings. "Pretty common in these older stations. Everything is properly calibrated now, but the communication interference will probably persist for a few hours." The guard looked at Marcus with suspicion, but the explanation was plausible and the maintenance readings appeared normal. After a moment's consideration, he decided to complete the escort assignment rather than investigate technical problems that were outside his area of expertise. "Finish your work quickly," the guard ordered. "I want to report this communication issue to my supervisor." Marcus nodded and continued his maintenance routine through the remaining suites. Each location gave him additional opportunities to observe security patterns, plant surveillance devices, and prepare contingency plans. By the time he finished his official assignments, he had transformed the luxury complex into a battlefield where he held every advantage. The weapons meeting in Suite 149 was concluding as Marcus completed his final environmental checks. His surveillance network tracked the criminal representatives as they left Corvex's suite, their business completed, and payment schedules established. Within minutes, the warlord would be alone except for his personal security team. Marcus packed his equipment with deliberate care, knowing that the next time he opened his kit, it would be to retrieve weapons rather than tools. 3 years of patient planning were about to culminate in a confrontation that would change everything. His escort accompanied him back to the security checkpoint, clearly eager to report the communication malfunction and return to more interesting duties. Marcus submitted to the standard exit procedures, allowing security scanners to verify that he was leaving with the same equipment he had brought. The scanners detected his tools, his work tablet, and his atmospheric monitoring devices. They found no weapons, no contraband, no evidence of any unauthorized activity. Marcus walked away from the luxury complex as quietly as he had arrived, just another maintenance worker completing another routine assignment. But hidden within the environmental systems of the complex was a network of surveillance devices, security overrides, and strategic preparations that would have impressed the galaxy's most sophisticated intelligence agencies. In 12 hours, when Corvex met with Station Administrator Kethvar, Marcus would be ready. The hunt was entering its final phase, and the predator was closing in on his prey. Marcus spent the afternoon in seemingly routine activities, maintaining his cover while preparing for the evening's operation. He submitted maintenance reports, attended a briefing about upcoming system upgrades, and even shared lunch with other workers in the common dining area. To anyone observing, he was having a perfectly ordinary day. The reality was far different. Every action served a strategic purpose. Every conversation gathered intelligence, and every movement positioned him for the final phase of his mission. During lunch, Marcus sat near a table of Vroken security personnel who were discussing the evening's diplomatic meeting between their mysterious guest and Station Administrator Kethvar. The guard spoke in casual military dialect, assuming that the nearby human maintenance workers couldn't understand their conversation. They were wrong. Marcus learned that Corvex would be escorted to the administrator's private chambers by a team of 6 guards, with an additional security detail posted throughout the diplomatic sector. The meeting was scheduled for 2100 station time, with an expected duration of 2 hours. Afterward, Corvex would return to his suite to prepare for departure the following morning. The guards were professionals, discussing contingency plans and emergency protocols with the thoroughness of experienced soldiers. But they were planning for conventional threats, rival criminals, law enforcement raids, or political assassinations carried out by obvious enemies with military equipment. None of their preparations would be effective against a single human who had spent 3 years becoming invisible. After lunch, Marcus returned to his quarters to make final preparations. He opened the concealed panel where he stored his specialized equipment, retrieving items that had been carefully designed and tested over months of patient work. The centerpiece was a device that appeared to be an ordinary atmospheric calibration tool. In reality, it was a marvel of human engineering that combined nanotechnology, quantum mechanics, and precision manufacturing. The weapon could penetrate virtually any armor, bypass most energy shields, and deliver its payload with surgical accuracy. More importantly, it would leave no trace that could be connected to human technology. Marcus also retrieved a small capsule containing a substance that most galactic security forces had never encountered, a modified version of Earth fungal spores that had been enhanced through genetic engineering. The spores were harmless to most species, but would cause immediate respiratory distress in Vrokans when activated. The plan was complex, but elegant. Marcus would use his infiltration capabilities to reach Corvex during the diplomatic meeting, when the warlord security would be focused on external threats rather than internal ones. The spore deployment would create chaos and confusion, providing cover for the assassination while making it appear to be the result of biological warfare rather than a targeted elimination. As evening approached, Marcus changed into his maintenance jumpsuit and gathered his equipment. Tonight, he wasn't just a maintenance worker. He was the culmination of humanity's most dangerous evolutionary advantages: intelligence, adaptability, and the capacity for sustained, calculated violence. The diplomatic sector was unusually active as Marcus made his way through its corridors. Security teams were conducting final sweeps, diplomatic staff were preparing meeting rooms, and various alien dignitaries were arriving for scheduled appointments. The increased activity provided perfect camouflage for his infiltration. Marcus approached his target through maintenance passages that he had mapped extensively over the past 3 years. The diplomatic sector's environmental systems were more sophisticated than those in the residential areas, but he had studied them thoroughly and knew every access point, every vulnerability, every blind spot in their sensor coverage. The first challenge was getting past the security checkpoints without triggering alarms. Marcus used his modified work tablet to access the environmental monitoring network, then carefully introduced false readings that would require immediate investigation by maintenance staff. Within minutes, his cover story was established: atmospheric imbalance in the diplomatic sector requiring emergency calibration. When he presented himself at the security checkpoint, his presence was not only expected, but welcomed. The guard were concerned about any environmental problems that might affect important diplomatic meetings, and they quickly cleared him for emergency access to the restricted areas. Marcus moved through the diplomatic sector with the confident efficiency of someone who belonged there. His hidden surveillance devices tracked security patrols, while his modified equipment created additional false readings that justified his continued presence in sensitive areas. The administrator's private chambers were located at the heart of the diplomatic sector, protected by multiple layers of security that would have deterred most intruders. But Marcus wasn't planning a frontal assault. He was going to wait until his target came to him. Using his access to the environmental systems, Marcus positioned himself in a maintenance alcove adjacent to the main conference room. The location was perfect, close enough to monitor the meeting through his surveillance devices, but hidden from normal security sweeps. He settled in to wait, his mind cycling through tactical scenarios and contingency plans. At exactly 2100 station time, Corvex arrived for his meeting with Station Administrator Kethvar. Marcus watched through his hidden cameras as the Vroken warlord entered the conference room, flanked by his security detail. Corvex was larger than most Vrokens, with enhanced bone ridges and scarring that spoke of extensive combat experience. His movements were controlled and precise, the bearing of someone who had survived decades of violence through skill and ruthlessness. The meeting began with formal diplomatic protocols as Kethvar greeted his guest. The Altarian administrator was elegant and refined, her crystalline skin shifting colors and patterns that indicated polite interest and cautious optimism. She had no idea that her guest was one of the galaxy's most wanted war criminals. Marcus activated his audio surveillance as the conversation moved beyond pleasantries into substantive negotiations. Corvex was proposing a massive mining operation in the Outer Rim territories, offering the station's government substantial fees in exchange for processing and shipping privileges. The proposal sounded legitimate on the surface, but Marcus recognized the subtext. The mining operation was cover for establishing military bases in strategically important systems. The ore processing would actually be weapons manufacturing. Corvex was attempting to purchase official legitimacy for his expansion into human-controlled space. As the negotiation continued, Marcus began his final preparations. He activated the spore capsule, allowing the modified organisms to spread through the environmental system surrounding the conference room. The spores would remain dormant until triggered by specific electromagnetic frequencies that his weapon could generate. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, and Corvex's security would have time to respond. Too late, and the warlord might escape before Marcus could complete his mission. Marcus watched as Kethvar reviewed Corvex's proposals, her crystalline features shifting to indicate thoughtful consideration. The Altarian was clearly intrigued by the financial opportunities, but she was also cautious about the political implications. Mining rights in the Outer Rim were a contentious issue that could affect relationships with multiple species. The scale of this operation would require significant security guarantees, Kethvar observed. The Outer Rim has been unstable since the Kepler incident. There are concerns about human retaliation for what they consider unprovoked attacks on their colonies. Marcus felt cold fury at the casual dismissal of his sister's murder, but he maintained tactical focus. Emotional reactions led to mistakes, and he had one chance to complete his mission. Corvex leaned back in his chair with predatory confidence. Human concerns are irrelevant, he said with dismissive contempt. They lack the military capability to threaten Vroken interests. The Kepler operation demonstrated their weakness clearly. Nevertheless, Kethvar continued, any mining operation would need to consider the political ramifications. The Galactic Trade Consortium has expressed concern about escalating tensions in that sector. The conversation provided Marcus with valuable intelligence about galactic politics, but, more importantly, it confirmed what he had long suspected. Corvex's attack on Kepler 442b had been a calculated operation designed to test human defenses and intimidate other species. It was time to show the galaxy that humans were far more dangerous than anyone suspected. Marcus left his hiding place and moved through the maintenance passages toward the conference room's environmental control center. His modified equipment gave him complete access to the atmospheric systems, allowing him to manipulate air pressure, temperature, and chemical composition with surgical precision. The first phase of his plan involved creating a minor environmental disturbance that would require Corvex's security team to investigate potential threats outside the conference room. Marcus introduced trace amounts of combustible gases into the corridor ventilation system, then triggered a small electrical discharge that would register as a potential fire hazard. Alarms began sounding in the diplomatic sector as automated systems detected the environmental anomaly. Within seconds, security protocols activated and guards began evacuating non-essential personnel from the affected areas. Corvex's security detail split up, with half remaining to protect their principal while the others investigated the potential threat. Perfect. Marcus moved closer to the conference room, using the chaos to mask his approach. His surveillance devices showed him the exact positions of the remaining guards and the layout of the room where Corvex was meeting with Kethvar. The Vroken warlord appeared unconcerned by the security alert, probably assuming it was routine maintenance or a minor technical malfunction. He continued his negotiations with the administrator, pressing for quick approval of his mining proposals. Marcus reached the environmental control panel directly adjacent to the conference room. From this position, he could monitor the meeting while preparing for the final phase of his attack. His weapon was ready, the spores were positioned, and the security situation was developing exactly as he had planned. Through his surveillance feeds, Marcus watched as Corvex became increasingly animated in his discussions with Kethvar. The warlord was describing his vision for Vroken expansion into human space, outlining plans that would result in the displacement or elimination of millions of civilians. Humans are fundamentally inferior, Corvex declared with obvious conviction. They lack the physical strength, the natural weapons, and the warrior instincts necessary for survival in a competitive galaxy. Their colonies exist only because stronger species have not yet decided to claim their territories. Kethvar's crystalline features shifted to indicate diplomatic neutrality, but Marcus could see that she was intrigued by Corvex's proposals. The financial benefits of supporting Vroken expansion were substantial, and Altarians were notorious for prioritizing profit over moral considerations. Marcus activated the final phase of his plan. Using his weapon's electromagnetic capabilities, he triggered the dormant spores that he had distributed through the environmental system. The modified organisms immediately began producing airborne compounds that would cause severe respiratory distress in Vroken physiology. Within seconds, Corvex's remaining security guard were gasping and choking as their breathing passages constricted. The warlord himself was more resistant due to his enhanced physique, but he was clearly affected by the biological attack. Chaos erupted in the conference room as the guard attempted to identify the source of the assault while fighting for breath. Emergency protocols activated automatically, sealing the room and calling for medical assistance. But the medical teams would arrive too late. Marcus moved through the environmental maintenance shaft that connected to the conference room's atmospheric system. The passage was barely wide enough for his human frame, far too small for Vroken physiology. Within seconds, he was positioned directly above the sealed conference room. Through his surveillance feeds, he could see Korvex struggling with the effects of a spore attack while trying to coordinate his security team's response. The warlord was reaching for his personal communicator, probably attempting to call for reinforcements from his ship. Marcus wouldn't allow that call to be completed. He activated his weapon and targeted the electromagnetic pulse at Korvex's communication device. The pulse would disrupt the electronics, while simultaneously serving as a delivery mechanism for a more lethal payload. The weapon fired with barely a whisper of sound, sending its projectile through the environmental shaft and into the conference room below. To any observer, it would appear that Korvex had suffered a sudden cardiac episode brought on by the respiratory stress of the spore attack. Marcus watched through his surveillance as the Vroken warlord collapsed, his enhanced physique finally overwhelmed by the combination of biological and technological assault. Korvex's eyes went wide with shock and pain as he realized what was happening, but he was already too weak to call for help. Within minutes, it was over. Thane Korvex, the butcher of Kepler, 442b, was dead. Marcus remained in position as emergency response teams arrived in the conference room. Medical scanners would detect traces of the spore attack and conclude that Korvex had died from an allergic reaction to an unknown biological agent. The electromagnetic pulse would be attributed to a malfunction in the station's electrical systems. No evidence would point to human involvement, much less to a single maintenance worker who had been invisible on the station for 3 years. As medics confirmed Korvex's death and security teams searched for the source of the biological attack, Marcus began his extraction plan. He moved through maintenance passages toward his prepared escape route, leaving behind false evidence that would mislead investigators while protecting his identity. The hunt was complete. Justice had been served, not through official channels or legal proceedings, but through the application of humanity's most dangerous characteristic, the ability to plan, adapt, and strike without warning. But Marcus's mission was far from over. Korvex's death would send shockwaves through the criminal underworld, but it would also reveal to the galaxy that humans were capable of far more than anyone had suspected. The real war was about to begin. In the hours following Korvex's death, Nexus Station transformed into a hive of investigation and speculation. Security forces from multiple species converged on the diplomatic sector, while medical teams analyzed biological samples and technical experts examined environmental systems for signs of sabotage. Marcus observed the chaos from his maintenance quarters, monitoring official communications through the access backdoors he had carefully established over 3 years. The investigators were competent, but confused, faced with evidence that seemed to point in multiple directions while providing no clear answers. The official preliminary report concluded that Korvex had suffered a fatal allergic reaction to an unknown biological contaminant that had somehow infiltrated the station's atmospheric systems. The electromagnetic disturbance was attributed to a cascade failure in the diplomatic sector's power grid, possibly triggered by the same environmental contamination. No one suspected human involvement, but Marcus knew that Korvex's death would have consequences far beyond a simple criminal elimination. The Vroken warlord had been a central figure in the galactic underworld, with connections to dozens of criminal organizations and corrupt officials. His sudden demise would create a power vacuum that others would rush to fill. More importantly, it would force the galaxy to confront an uncomfortable truth. Humans were far more dangerous than anyone had realized. The first indication of this shift came 18 hours after Korvex's death, when Marcus intercepted encrypted communications between Vroken military commanders. The messages were filled with concern and confusion as high-ranking officers tried to understand how one of their most powerful warlords could have died so mysteriously on a heavily protected space station. Corvex was enhanced, transmitted Admiral Thexvar from her flagship in the Outer Rim. Military-grade genetic modifications, combat implants, and immune system boosters that should have protected him from any biological weapon. His death makes no tactical sense. The preliminary investigation found no evidence of conventional assassination, replied General Crox from Vroken High Command. No weapon signatures, no explosive residue, no signs of physical violence. Whatever killed him was subtle enough to fool our best forensic specialists. Marcus smiled grimly as he monitored their communications. The Vroken military leadership was beginning to realize that they faced an unknown threat, something beyond their understanding or experience. But the real revelation came when Marcus accessed the personal files that Corvex had maintained on his private ship. The warlord's security had been breached during the chaos following his death, allowing Marcus to infiltrate the vessel's computer systems and extract valuable intelligence. What he found exceeded his worst expectations. Corvex had been planning a coordinated assault on 17 human colonies, using biological weapons specifically designed to target human genetic markers. The attack would have begun within 6 months, timed to coincide with harvest seasons when colonies were most vulnerable. Estimated casualties exceeded 50 million civilians. The operation had been approved by the Vroken High Council and supported by criminal organizations across 3 star systems. Funding had already been secured, weapons were in production, and delivery systems were being positioned throughout human space. Marcus stared at the intelligence data, feeling cold fury build in his chest. Kepler 442b hadn't been an isolated incident or a test of human defenses. It had been the opening move in a systematic genocide campaign designed to eliminate humanity's presence in the galaxy. But now Corvex was dead, and the coordination of that campaign was broken. Marcus began copying the intelligence files while considering his options. The smart move would be to transmit everything to Human Defense Force intelligence and let official channels handle the threat. But official channels moved slowly, and there were still 17 colonies at risk from other elements of Corvex's network. Besides, Marcus had spent 3 years learning that the galaxy's criminals and predators only understood one kind of communication: force. As he worked through Corvex's files, Marcus identified the key figures in the genocide plot. 3 Vroken warlords who controlled weapons production, 2 Altarian financiers who provided funding, and a Sithrak smuggling network that handled distribution. Each was a critical node in the conspiracy, and each was vulnerable to the right kind of pressure. Marcus began planning his next moves when an unexpected development interrupted his work. Station-wide communications announced that Nexus Station was receiving a diplomatic delegation from the Human Defense Force, arriving to investigate the death of a being they described as a person of interest in ongoing war crimes proceedings. The human delegation was led by Admiral Sarah Chun, commander of the HDF's Intelligence Division and Marcus's former superior officer. Sarah was one of the few people in the galaxy who knew about Marcus's capabilities and current assignment. More importantly, she was his sister. Marcus felt a complex mixture of emotions as he watched Sarah's ship dock at Nexus Station. He hadn't seen her since their parents' funeral 5 years ago, and their last conversation had been a bitter argument about Marcus's decision to pursue Corvex outside official channels. Sarah had argued for patience and legal procedures. Marcus had argued for direct action and immediate justice. The disagreement had effectively ended their relationship, leaving both siblings convinced that the other was making a terrible mistake. Now Sarah would discover that Marcus had been right about the limitations of official justice, but she would also learn that his methods had consequences neither of them had anticipated. Marcus monitored Sarah's movements as she established a temporary command center in the diplomatic sector. Her team included intelligence specialists, forensic experts, and technical analysts who began conducting their own investigation into Korvex's death. Their methods were more sophisticated than the station's security forces, and Marcus realized that his cover might not survive close scrutiny from people who knew how to look for human operational signatures. The situation became more complicated when Sarah requested access to the station's maintenance records and personnel files. Marcus watched through his surveillance network as his sister reviewed employment data, looking for any anomalies that might indicate covert human presence on the station. His false identity was solid, backed by 3 years of genuine work performance and carefully constructed background documentation. But Sarah knew him better than anyone else in the galaxy. If she examined his file closely enough, she might recognize patterns that would reveal his true identity. Marcus made a tactical decision that went against every instinct he had developed during his intelligence career. He decided to make contact. Using his access to the station's communication systems, Marcus sent Sarah an encrypted message through channels that only she would recognize. The message was brief and unsigned, but it contained enough coded references to their shared childhood that Sarah would know who had sent it. Package delivered. Target eliminated. 17 locations at risk. Need immediate consultation. Marcus waited in his quarters as Sarah processed the message and tried to locate its source. He knew that she would eventually trace the communication back to him, but the process would take time and give him the opportunity to prepare for their confrontation. The response came 6 hours later, routed through the same encrypted channels that Marcus had used. Sarah's message was equally brief, but carried the weight of years of separation and bitter disagreement. Maintenance Bay 7. Midnight. Come alone. Marcus spent the evening monitoring station communications while preparing for the meeting that would determine the rest of his mission. Sarah's investigation had uncovered evidence of the spore attack and the electromagnetic pulse that had killed Korvex, but she hadn't yet identified the source of either weapon. More importantly, her team had begun analyzing the intelligence files from Korvex's ship, discovering the same genocide plot that Marcus had uncovered. Sarah was beginning to understand the scale of the threat that humanity faced and the inadequacy of official responses to that threat. At midnight, Marcus made his way to Maintenance Bay 7 through passages that avoided surveillance coverage. The bay was located in a remote section of the station, used primarily for storing obsolete equipment and conducting repairs that required absolute isolation from other systems. Sarah was waiting for him when he arrived, standing near a pile of deactivated atmospheric processors with her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. She looked older than Marcus remembered, with stress lines around her eyes and gray streaks in her hair that spoke of the pressures of command. "Hello, Marcus," she said quietly. "I was wondering when you would finally surface." Marcus stepped into the light, allowing his sister to see the changes that 3 years of deep cover work had made in his appearance. He was leaner than before, with the weathered look of someone who worked with his hands for a living. But his eyes retained the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the HDF's most effective operatives. "Hello, Sarah. I assume you've seen Korvex's files by now." Sarah nodded grimly. 50 million civilians. 17 colonies. A coordinated genocide campaign that we never detected until after the coordinator was dead. She paused, studying her brother's face. "You've been hunting him for 3 years." "Someone had to," Marcus replied. "Official channels were compromised. Too many politicians in Korvex's pocket. Too many officials who preferred stability over justice. So you decided to handle it yourself," Sarah said with obvious anger. "Throwing away your career, your family, your entire life to pursue a vendetta that could have been resolved through proper procedures." Marcus felt his own anger rising. Proper procedures got 2 million people killed on Kepler 442b. Proper procedures would have gotten 50 million more killed in 6 months. How many dead civilians are you willing to accept for the sake of proper procedures? The siblings faced each other across the maintenance bay. Years of disagreement and mutual frustration finally coming to a head. But beneath the anger, Marcus could see something else in Sarah's expression, reluctant admiration for what he had accomplished. "Your assassination technique was remarkable," Sarah admitted. "Biological weapon delivery through environmental systems, electromagnetic pulse to mask the kill mechanism, and extraction without leaving any evidence that could be traced to human involvement. My forensic team can barely figure out what happened, much less how it was done. I had 3 years to plan," Marcus replied, "and I had a very good teacher in intelligence methodology." Sarah smiled despite herself. "I suppose I did train you well." "Too well, apparently." Her expression grew serious again. "But, Marcus, what you've done has consequences that extend far beyond Korvex's death. The galaxy is about to learn that humans are capable of sophisticated covert operations, and that knowledge will change everything." Marcus nodded. "I know, but the alternative was allowing Korvex to complete his genocide campaign. Sometimes tactical necessities override strategic concerns." "And now?" Sarah asked. "Korvex is dead, but his network is still active. 3 warlords, 2 financiers, and a smuggling operation that can still deliver biological weapons to human colonies. What's your plan for dealing with them?" Marcus had been hoping that Sarah would ask that question. "I need official support for the next phase of the operation. Intelligence assets, technical resources, and legal cover for actions that will be difficult to explain through normal channels." Sarah considered the request carefully. As an admiral in the Human Defense Force, she had the authority to authorize covert operations that serve humanity's strategic interests. But she also had the responsibility to ensure that such operations didn't create more problems than they solved. "The political situation is complicated," she said finally. "Korvex's death has already triggered shifts in the galactic power balance. Vroken military commanders are demanding increased security measures, and several species are questioning whether humans pose a greater threat than they previously believed." "Let them question," Marcus replied. "For too long, humanity has been seen as weak prey that anyone can victimize without consequences. Maybe it's time for the galaxy to learn that humans are predators, not prey." Sarah studied her brother's face, seeing the cold determination that had driven him for 3 years. "You're talking about a fundamental change in how humanity is perceived throughout the galaxy. Once that happens, there's no going back to being seen as harmless." "We were never harmless," Marcus said quietly. "We were just patient. But patience has limits, and Korvex found them." The conversation was interrupted by an alarm signal from Sarah's communicator. She checked the device and frowned at the information displayed on its screen. "What is it?" Marcus asked. "Intelligence reports from 3 star systems," Sarah replied. "Vroken military forces are mobilizing in response to Korvex's death. It looks like they're preparing for some kind of coordinated action." Marcus felt cold certainty settle in his stomach. "They're accelerating the genocide campaign. Without Korvex to coordinate the biological weapons, they're going to use conventional military force to attack the colonies." Sarah's expression grew grim as she processed the implications. 17 colonies with minimal defensive capabilities against a coordinated Vroken assault. They could be overwhelmed within weeks. The siblings looked at each other, years of disagreement suddenly, irrelevant in the face of immediate crisis. Sarah had spent years trying to protect humanity through official channels and proper procedures. Marcus had spent years pursuing justice through direct action and covert operations. Neither approach had been sufficient to prevent the current crisis. "I need your help," Marcus said simply. "And you need mine. The galaxy is about to learn what humans are truly capable of when someone threatens our families." Sarah nodded slowly. "What do you have in mind?" Marcus smiled, and for the first time in years, it was an expression of genuine warmth rather than calculated deception. "I'm going to teach the galaxy why humans evolved to be apex predators, and you're going to help me do it officially." The war for humanity's survival was about to begin, and the galaxy had no idea what was coming. 6 months after Korvex's death, the galaxy had learned a harsh lesson about underestimating humanity. The Vroken assault on human colonies had begun exactly as Marcus predicted, with coordinated attacks on 17 worlds that military planners believed were defenseless. The aliens had expected quick victories against primitive humans who lacked the strength and natural weapons of more advanced species. They had been catastrophically wrong. Admiral Sarah Chun stood on the bridge of the HDF flagship Retribution, watching tactical displays that showed the aftermath of the most decisive military campaign in galactic history. In 6 months, human forces had not only repelled the Vroken assault, but had systematically dismantled the entire criminal network that had supported it. The transformation had begun with Marcus's intelligence files from Corvex's ship. Sarah had used her authority to authorize a series of covert operations that eliminated key nodes in the genocide conspiracy. 3 Vroken warlords had died in what appeared to be random accidents. 2 Altarian financiers had been arrested by their own governments after evidence of their criminal activities mysteriously appeared in official databases. The Sithrak smuggling network had suffered a series of catastrophic system failures that destroyed their weapon stockpiles. But the real surprise had come when the Vroken military launched their conventional assault on human colonies. The aliens had expected to face desperate civilians with primitive weapons and minimal military support. Instead, they encountered defensive systems that seemed to anticipate their every move, coordinated resistance that neutralized their tactical advantages, and weapons technology that nobody had known humans possessed. The Battle of New Geneva had lasted exactly 43 minutes. A Vroken battle fleet of 37 warships had entered the system expecting to conduct a routine orbital bombardment of a lightly defended agricultural colony. They found themselves facing a defensive network that included stealth mines, quantum torpedo launchers, and energy weapons that penetrated their supposedly impenetrable armor plating. The human defenders had used tactics that no other species had ever employed. They struck from unexpected angles, used the enemy's strengths against them, and demonstrated a level of strategic thinking that amazed galactic military observers. When the battle ended, 35 Vroken ships had been destroyed or captured. The 2 survivors fled back to Vroken space, carrying reports of human military capabilities that their commanders initially refused to believe. Similar defeats followed at Kepler Prime, New Tokyo, and Harmony Station. Each battle demonstrated new aspects of human warfare that forced alien military theorists to completely revise their assumptions about Earth-descended species. Humans didn't fight like other species. They didn't rely on superior strength, natural armor, or overwhelming numbers. Instead, they fought like apex predators, intelligent, adaptable, and utterly ruthless when their survival was threatened. Marcus watched the tactical summaries from his new position as Director of Special Operations, a role that gave him official authority for the covert missions he had been conducting unofficially for years. His maintenance worker identity had been retired, replaced by military credentials that reflected his true capabilities. The galaxy was still trying to understand what had happened. How had humans developed such advanced military technology without anyone noticing? How had they coordinated defensive operations across multiple star systems with such precision? How had a species that everyone considered primitive managed to defeat some of the galaxy's most experienced warriors? The answer was simpler than most aliens could comprehend. Humans had never been primitive. They had simply been patient. For decades, human colonies had appeared to focus on agriculture, trade, and peaceful development while maintaining minimal defensive capabilities. Galactic observers had interpreted this as evidence of human weakness, never suspecting that it was actually camouflage for the most sophisticated military development program in known space. Every human colony contained hidden manufacturing facilities that could produce advanced weapons on demand. Every civilian ship was equipped with concealed military systems that could be activated in emergencies. Every human settlement was part of a communication network that allowed instant coordination across interstellar distances. Most importantly, every human colonist had received military training that prepared them to become effective soldiers when their homes were threatened. The Vroken assault had activated defensive systems that had been decades in the making, revealing capabilities that transformed humanity from apparent prey into the galaxy's dominant predator species. But the military victories were only part of the transformation. Marcus's assassination of Corvex had demonstrated human capabilities in covert operations that forced criminal organizations throughout the galaxy to reconsider their assumptions about Earth-descended species. The quiet maintenance worker who had eliminated one of the most protected warlords in known space had become a legend that inspired fear among those who preyed on the innocent. Similar operations had followed, targeting criminals and corrupt officials who had supported the genocide conspiracy. Each elimination was precise, untraceable, and devastating to criminal networks that had believed themselves untouchable. The galaxy's underworld had learned that humans were not safe victims to be exploited without consequences. Sarah reviewed the latest intelligence reports from her command center aboard Retribution. The political situation was evolving rapidly as species throughout the galaxy adjusted to the new reality of human military supremacy. The Altarian Trade Federation had formally apologized for their citizens' involvement in the genocide plot and requested defensive alliance negotiations. The Croton Republic had proposed joint military exercises to learn from human tactical innovations. Even the Sithrak Empire had sent diplomatic envoys seeking accommodation with humanity's expanding sphere of influence. Most significantly, the Vroken High Council had requested a formal ceasefire and peace negotiations, effectively acknowledging that their military could not defeat human defensive capabilities. "Admiral," reported her intelligence officer, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Nexus Station. Station Administrator Kethvar is requesting immediate diplomatic consultation about establishing human administrative presence in their sector." Sarah smiled at the irony. 6 months ago, Kethvar had been negotiating with Corvex about mining rights that would have supported Vroken expansion into human space. Now she was offering administrative control to prevent human expansion into her territory. "Schedule a meeting," Sarah ordered. "But make it clear that our terms will be non-negotiable. Full access to station records, complete cooperation with ongoing investigations, and removal of all Vroken military personnel from the sector." The transformation extended beyond military and political changes. Throughout the galaxy, the perception of humans had shifted from harmless primitives to dangerous predators who should be approached with extreme caution. Marcus observed this shift during his travels to coordinate ongoing special operations. On Nexus Station, where he had once been dismissed as disposable labor, alien inhabitants now watched him with nervous respect. His presence carried weight that had nothing to do with physical strength or natural weapons. They had learned that humans possess something far more dangerous than claws or armor: the ability to think strategically, plan patiently, and strike without warning when threatened. The lesson was spreading throughout galactic civilization. Trade negotiations now included human representatives as essential participants rather than minor voices to be ignored. Diplomatic conferences required human approval for any significant decisions. Criminal organizations avoided human targets and actively sought to make amends for past offenses. The galaxy had discovered that Earth-descended humans were not just another species competing for resources and territory. They were apex predators who had evolved intelligence, adaptability, and social cooperation to levels that made them nearly unstoppable when properly motivated. But the most important change was in humanity itself. For generations, human colonists had accepted second-class status in galactic civilization, believing that they lacked the natural advantages necessary to compete with more physically impressive species. The events of the past 6 months had shattered that myth and revealed humanity's true potential. Human colonies were no longer isolated agricultural settlements dependent on alien protection. They were strategic outposts of a species that had claimed its rightful place as one of the galaxy's dominant powers. Human military forces were no longer defensive units designed to delay inevitable defeat. They were precision instruments capable of defeating any enemy through superior tactics, advanced technology, and coordinated strategy. Human intelligence services were no longer limited to gathering information for other species' decision-making processes. They were sophisticated operations that shaped galactic events through carefully planned interventions. Marcus stood in his office aboard the HDF intelligence ship Shadow's Edge, reviewing reports from agents operating throughout known space. The network he had begun building during his years on Nexus Station had expanded to include operatives on every major world and space station in the galaxy. These agents weren't just gathering intelligence. They were actively protecting human interests, eliminating threats before they could develop, and ensuring that no species would ever again mistake humanity for easy prey. The transformation was complete. Humans had evolved from victims to predators, from followers to leaders, from prey to apex hunters who shaped the galaxy according to their will. But Marcus knew that evolution was an ongoing process. New threats would emerge as species adapted to humanity's revealed capabilities. Criminal organizations would develop countermeasures for human operational techniques. Military forces would design weapons and tactics specifically intended to neutralize human advantages. The galaxy had learned to fear humanity, but fear could motivate innovation as much as submission. The next phase of human expansion would face opposition from beings who understood what they were fighting against. Marcus welcomed the challenge. Humans had spent millennia evolving to survive and thrive in competitive environments. The galaxy was simply the latest arena where humanity would prove its dominance. He activated his communication system and began composing orders for agents throughout known space. Intelligence gathering missions, protective operations, and strategic interventions that would ensure human interests remained paramount in galactic affairs. The maintenance worker who had been dismissed as harmless labor was now coordinating operations that affected billions of lives across hundreds of star systems. It was a transformation that perfectly illustrated humanity's greatest strength, the ability to adapt, evolve, and exceed every limitation that others imposed upon them. Sarah joined Marcus in his office as he finalized operational assignments for the coming month. The siblings had rebuilt their relationship during the campaign against Corvex's network, learning to combine their different approaches into a strategy that was more effective than either could achieve alone. The Galactic Trade Consortium has requested a meeting, Sarah reported. They want to discuss adjusting commercial regulations to reflect changing political realities in human-controlled space. Marcus smiled at the diplomatic language that obscured a simple truth. The galaxy's most powerful commercial organization was acknowledging human dominance and seeking accommodation with a new power structure. Schedule it, he said, but make sure they understand that we're not interested in adjustments. We're interested in complete restructuring of trade relationships to reflect humanity's position as the galaxy's primary stabilizing force. Sarah nodded. Understood. What about the Vroken peace negotiations? Their representatives are becoming increasingly desperate to reach some kind of accommodation. Let them wait, Marcus replied. Desperation leads to better concessions. Besides, we're still identifying and eliminating the remaining elements of Corvex's network. The Vrokens need to understand that their cooperation is required, not negotiated. The conversation was interrupted by an alert from the ship's communication system. Priority transmission from Human Defense Force headquarters, marked for immediate attention of senior command staff. Sarah accepted the transmission and reviewed its contents while Marcus continued his operational planning. After several minutes, she looked up with an expression of satisfied anticipation. New intelligence from the Outer Rim, she announced. 3 species are forming a military alliance specifically designed to counter human expansion. They're calling it the Galactic Balance Coalition, and they're planning coordinated military action against our most remote colonies. Marcus felt the familiar surge of predatory anticipation that had driven him since his sister's death on Kepler 442b. Let me guess. They believe that humanity's recent victories were due to luck and superior technology, not fundamental capabilities. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. They think they can neutralize human advantages through numerical superiority and coordinated tactics. Marcus activated his tactical planning systems and began analyzing intelligence about the three species involved in the coalition. Each had specific strengths and weaknesses that could be exploited through properly applied pressure. Each believed they understood human capabilities based on limited observation and flawed analysis. They were about to receive the same education that the Vroken military had experienced 6 months earlier. Send a message to all operational teams, Marcus ordered. Inform them that we have new targets who require education about humanity's true capabilities. Sarah smiled as she prepared to transmit the orders that would initiate the next phase of human expansion. Any specific instructions? Marcus considered the question for a moment, thinking about the galaxy that was slowly learning to respect human power. Some lessons required gentle instruction. Others required more direct methods. Tell them to be thorough, he said finally. The galaxy seems to need regular reminders about why humans are apex predators. It's time for another demonstration. As Shadow's Edge adjusted course toward the Outer Rim territories where humanity's next challengers were preparing their assault, Marcus reflected on the transformation that had begun with his hunt for Corvex. A single human maintenance worker's quest for justice had evolved into a galaxy-wide recognition of humanity's true nature. They had learned that humans were not the weak, primitive beings that everyone had believed them to be. They were patient hunters, strategic thinkers, and adaptable predators who could thrive in any environment that didn't simply kill them outright. The galaxy was vast, filled with species that still believed they could challenge humanity's growing dominance. Each would receive the same education that the Vrokens had earned. Humans were not prey. They were the apex predators of known space, and they were done being underestimated. The hunt continued, but now it was the galaxy itself that was learning to fear the quiet humans who walked among them, planning, watching, and waiting for the right moment to remind everyone why Earth had produced the most dangerous species in the known universe. Marcus smiled as he watched the stars stream past the ship's viewports. Somewhere out there, aliens were plotting against humanity, convinced they could exploit what they saw as temporary advantages. They would learn better. They always did.